The Galactic Academy's cultural exchange program was in the most charitable terms possible, a complete joke. Picture this. Take the most patronizing diversity seminar you've ever endured, multiply it by 1,000, then throw in some laser guns and call it military training. That's what humanity had signed up for when they joined the Galactic community 3 years ago. Cadet Riley Knox had figured this out approximately 17 minutes into orientation, when Commander Throkus, a 7-foot-tall reptilian, who looked like someone had given a Komodo dragon anger management issues in a uniform, had explained that humans would be given special accommodations during combat training. Translation: they thought humans were adorable little weaklings who might break if you looked at them wrong. Riley's roommate, Cadet Blixworth Zephram, was the exception to the Academy's general attitude problem. Blixworth was a Zelanian, which meant he had 4 arms, purple skin that shifted colors with his mood, and a tendency to be more dramatic than a Shakespeare tragedy performed by theater majors on espresso. He was also the only alien at the Academy who didn't talk to Riley like she was a particularly clever pet. "Riley, my dearest human companion," Blixworth had announced that morning, his skin cycling through shades of excited violet. "Today we shall show these pompous scale breathers and gas bags what real tactical thinking looks like." "Sure thing, Blix," Riley had replied, checking her training rifle for the 3rd time. "Just remember, when this goes sideways, and it will go sideways, try not to overact." Blixworth had placed one of his 4 hands over his heart in mock offense. "Me? Overact? I am the very picture of subtle performance." That should have been Riley's first warning. The combat simulation was supposed to be routine, standard urban warfare scenario, live ammunition with safety protocols, the works. The alien cadets strutted around like they were auditioning for an action movie, while the handful of human cadets got relegated to support roles, basically stand in the corner and try not to get shot. Riley had other plans. She'd been watching the Academy's tactical patterns for weeks, noting every weakness, every assumption, every moment where their superiority complex made them sloppy. Today she was going to exploit every single one. The simulation began, and within 30 seconds, it became clear that the aliens had made their usual mistake. They'd forgotten that humans were actually participating. Riley moved through the urban maze like smoke, picking off targets that never saw her coming, while Blixworth provided perfectly timed distractions with his usual theatrical flair. That's when Cadet Morkoth, a hulking rock-skinned Gravarian, who had all the tactical subtlety of a meteor strike, decided he'd had enough of being outmaneuvered by a fragile little human. The plasma bolt caught Blixworth's center mass. For a moment everything stopped. Purple blood splattered across the concrete wall behind him, and Blixworth's 4 arms went limp as he crumpled to the ground, his skin fading from vibrant purple to an unsettling gray. The other cadets stood frozen, waiting for the safety protocols to kick in, for the simulation to reset, for someone to announce that it was all a mistake. Instead, Riley Knox walked over to her roommate's body, knelt down, and very calmly picked up his head. 23 seconds. That's how long it took her to walk out of that simulation chamber, covered in purple blood, carrying Blixworth's head in her arms, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Her expression never changed. No tears, no screaming, no shock. Just a small, almost pleasant smile as she looked at the ring of horrified alien faces staring back at her. "Well," she said conversationally, adjusting her grip on Blixworth's head, "I guess the safety protocols need some work." If you've ever wondered what it sounds like when an entire military academy collectively loses its mind, it's approximately 17 different species, all screaming in their native languages, while klaxons blare and emergency lights flash like a disco ball having a seizure. Commander Throkus arrived on scene within minutes, his scales practically rattling with barely contained fury. He took one look at Riley, still holding Blixworth's head like a macabre trophy, purple blood slowly dripping from her uniform, and his reptilian brain apparently short-circuited. "Knox," he hissed, his forked tongue flicking out nervously, "put that down immediately." Riley tilted her head, as if considering the request. "Put what down, sir?" The head, Cadet." "Oh, this." Riley held up Blixworth's head slightly, studying it with the casual interest of someone examining a particularly interesting rock. "I thought I should probably keep the pieces together. You know, for the investigation." The color drained from every alien face in the vicinity. Well, the ones that had color to begin with. The gaseous ether beings just sort of dimmed. Throkus tried to regain his composure, puffing up his chest in what was probably meant to be an intimidating display. "Cadet Knox, you will submit to immediate psychological evaluation and Commander." Riley interrupted, her voice still unnaturally calm. "With all due respect, I think we should focus on the fact that someone just murdered my roommate in what was supposed to be a training exercise." She paused, then added with a slight smile, "Unless of course that was intentional." The silence that followed was the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own heartbeat. Several cadets took actual steps backward. Morkoth, the Gravarian who'd fired the shot, looked like he was seriously reconsidering his life choices. That's when Dr. Pendleton Hayes arrived, and if you wanted to see what human damage control looked like, he was your guy. Hayes was the Academy's only human medical officer, a mild-mannered man in his 50s, who wore wire-rimmed glasses and cardigans like armor against the chaos of alien military bureaucracy. Commander Thrakus, Hayes said, slightly out of breath from running. I came as soon as I heard. What's the situation? Thrakus gestured helplessly at Riley, who was now sitting cross-legged on the floor, cradling Blixworth's head in her lap like she was petting a cat. Your human has experienced some kind of psychological break. Hayes adjusted his glasses and studied Riley with the clinical detachment of someone who'd seen too much weird stuff to be easily rattled. Riley, how are you feeling right now? I'm fine, Dr. Hayes, Riley replied, gently stroking one of Blixworth's cheek ridges. A little sad about Blix, but otherwise fine. Right, Hayes said slowly. And you're holding his head because... It seemed rude to leave it on the floor. The logical simplicity of this statement seemed to break something in the surrounding aliens' minds. You could practically hear their worldviews creaking under the strain. Hayes crouched down next to Riley, his voice taking on the careful tone you'd use with someone standing on a ledge. Riley, I need you to understand that this behavior is concerning to our alien colleagues. Riley looked up at him with perfectly clear, rational eyes. Oh, I know, they think I've snapped. She glanced around at the circle of horrified faces watching her. Haven't I? The way she said it, like she was asking about the weather, sent a collective shudder through every non-human present. This wasn't grief or trauma or rage. This was something much, much worse. This was a human being who had accepted violence as a perfectly reasonable solution to problems. And somehow, that was absolutely terrifying. Now, here's where things get interesting. See, what nobody at the Galactic Academy knew, including Dr. Hayes, who was doing his best impression of a man trying to defuse a bomb with a philosophy degree, was that Riley Knox and Blixworth Zephram had been planning this exact scenario for 3 months. It had started innocently enough, well, as innocently as anything involving Riley Knox could start, which was somewhere between mildly concerning and probably illegal in 12 systems. Picture this: 2 months into the semester, Riley's sitting in their shared quarters, watching Blixworth dramatically collapse onto his bunk after another day of being treated like the galaxy's most overprivileged summer camp counselors. Riley, my dear human friend, Blixworth had moaned, all 4 arms flung out in peak theatrical despair. I cannot endure another day of Commander Thrakus explaining basic tactical concepts to us like we are hatchlings who have just discovered fire. Riley had looked up from her datapad, where she'd been researching xenobiology for reasons that were definitely not related to homework. You know what your problem is, Blix. My devastating good looks and natural charisma. You're too nice. Riley had set down her datapad and fixed him with that look she got when she was about to suggest something that would either get them expelled or promoted. They don't respect us because they think we're harmless. Are we not harmless? Blixworth had asked, his skin shifting to a curious shade of teal. Buddy, I'm from Detroit, and you're from a species that literally fought a 100-year war over mineral rights. We are the opposite of harmless. That's when Riley had discovered the most fascinating fact about Zelanian biology: they could survive what most species would consider fatal trauma for up to 6 hours, thanks to a backup cardiovascular system that kicked in during extreme stress. Their bodies would shut down, their skin would go gray, they'd appear completely dead, but underneath, their secondary organs would keep their brain functional until help arrived. It's an evolutionary adaptation, Blixworth had explained, warming to the topic as his skin brightened to an excited purple. My ancestors developed it to survive the crimson predators of Zephyria Prime. Play dead convincingly enough, and the predator loses interest. Riley had stared at him for a long moment. Then she'd smiled, and if you knew Riley Knox, you knew that smile was either very good news or very bad news, depending on which side of it you were on. Blix, she'd said slowly, how would you like to give the performance of a lifetime? The plan they'd hatched was beautifully simple. Create a situation where Riley would appear to have a complete psychological break following the death of her closest friend. Let the Academy's prejudices work against them, their assumption that humans were emotionally unstable primitives who couldn't handle real violence. Use their fear to finally gain the respect that competence alone hadn't earned them. The key, Riley had explained during one of their planning sessions, is commitment to the bit. You have to really sell being dead, and I have to really sell being a traumatized human who's just discovered her capacity for violence. Blixworth had practiced his death scene with the dedication of a method actor preparing for Hamlet. Riley had studied every human psychological profile in the Academy database, learning exactly what kind of behavior would trigger maximum alarm in their alien colleagues. They'd run through contingencies, backup plans, and emergency protocols. What they hadn't planned for was how incredibly well it would work. The beautiful thing, Riley had told Blixworth the night before their staged incident, is that they want to believe we're dangerous. Deep down, every species in this galaxy knows that humans and Zelanians didn't get where we are by being nice. They're just comfortable pretending we're harmless because it fits their narrative. Blixworth had grinned, his skin cycling through pleased shades of violet, and tomorrow we give them permission to stop pretending. Exactly, Riley had cracked her knuckles, a sound that made Blixworth's skin ripple with sympathetic anticipation. Tomorrow we remind them why apex predators evolved to fear the dark. The only variable they hadn't accounted for was Dr. Hayes, who was currently crouched next to Riley, trying to psychoanalyze what he thought was a genuine trauma response. Poor guy was doing his absolute best to help a human in crisis, completely unaware that the human in question was putting on the performance of her life. Riley felt almost bad about that. Almost. What happened next was a masterclass in psychological warfare disguised as a mental health crisis, and honestly, it was beautiful to watch if you appreciated that sort of thing. Riley had spent weeks studying the Academy's crisis response protocols, and she knew exactly which buttons to push to send the entire command structure into full panic mode. Step 1 was already complete. Establish herself as an unpredictable element. Step 2 was where things got really interesting. Dr. Hayes, Riley said, her voice taking on just the right note of confused vulnerability. Do you think they're going to court-martial me? Hayes adjusted his glasses nervously. Riley, I think we need to focus on getting you some help right now. This kind of traumatic response, but I killed him. Riley's interruption was delivered with the flat certainty of someone stating an obvious fact. I mean, technically Morkoth fired the shot, but I put Blix in that position. I used him as bait. She paused, tilting her head as she looked down at Blixworth's perfectly motionless face. I probably should feel worse about that. The circle of alien observers took a collective step backward. Commander Thrakus made a sound that was somewhere between a hiss and a whimper. Dr. Hayes, bless his academically trained heart, tried to apply standard human psychological frameworks to what he was seeing. Riley, survivor's guilt is a normal response to is it guilt if you'd do it again? That question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Hayes actually stumbled backward, his face going pale. Around them, alien cadets were pulling out their communication devices, no doubt sending frantic messages to friends and family about the human who had apparently suffered a complete psychotic break. Riley, meanwhile, was just getting started. She stood up slowly, still cradling Blixworth's head, and began pacing in a small circle. To the watching aliens, it probably looked like the restless movement of a predator. In reality, Riley was fighting not to smile as she heard the whispered conversations starting around the perimeter. Did you see how fast she moved during the simulation? She was tracking multiple targets simultaneously. That's not normal human behavior. My podmate said humans are descended from pursuit predators. They used to hunt by literally running their prey to death. Look at her eyes. There's nothing there. No remorse, no fear. That's not normal for mammals. Perfect. The rumors were already starting, spreading through the Academy's gossip network faster than a computer virus. Riley had counted on this. Aliens love to speculate about human psychology almost as much as they love to underestimate human capabilities. Commander Thrakus was trying to regain control of the situation, but his voice kept cracking. All non-essential personnel, return to your quarters immediately. This is now a restricted area. The cadets scattered, but Riley knew they'd be talking. Within an hour, every being on the station would know that a human had experienced what appeared to be a complete psychological break, and that she was displaying behavior patterns that suggested she might not be quite as harmless as previously assumed. Dr. Hayes was frantically consulting his datapad, probably looking up emergency psychological protocols. Riley, I'm going to need you to come with me to the medical bay. We need to run some tests, make sure you're not suffering from any kind of neural trauma. Will they let me bring Blix? Riley asked, hefting Blixworth's head slightly. Riley, we need to prepare his body for. No, the single word carried enough finality to stop every conversation in the area. Riley's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted, like a switch being flipped from compliance to immovable object. I'm not leaving him alone with people who think his life was worth less than target practice. Commander Thrakus puffed himself up to his full 7-foot height. Cadet Knox, you will follow orders, or I will have you restrained and... Riley turned to look at him, and for the first time since this whole performance began, she let a little bit of her actual personality show through. Just a glimpse of the woman who had grown up in Detroit, who had earned her way into the academy through sheer bloody-minded determination, who had been watching aliens treat humans like amusing pets for months and was thoroughly done with it. "Commander," she said quietly, "I just watched my best friend get murdered because one of your cadets decided that humans needed to be put in their place. Right now, I am holding on to my self-control by a very thin thread." She paused, letting that sink in. "You really want to find out what happens if that thread snaps?" The silence that followed was deafening. Every alien in the area was now staring at Riley with the dawning realization that maybe, just maybe, they had seriously misjudged the human species. Dr. Hayes cleared his throat nervously. Perhaps we could arrange for a private examination room, where Cadet Knox would be more comfortable." Riley's expression softened back to that unsettling calm. "That would be nice, Dr. Hayes. Thank you." As they began walking toward the medical bay, Riley could hear the whispered conversations resuming behind them, each speculation more alarmed than the last. Her plan was working even better than she'd hoped. The only tricky part now was going to be keeping Blixworth's body temperature regulated, and making sure his secondary circulatory system didn't start showing signs of activity. That, and making sure she could maintain this performance for another few hours without breaking character. Fortunately, Riley Knox had always been very, very good at playing the long game. If there's one thing you learn about elaborate deceptions, it's that they have a nasty habit of developing complications at the worst possible moments. And for Riley and Blixworth's scheme, the worst possible moment arrived exactly 3 hours and 47 minutes into their performance, in the form of Academy coroner Griselda Morthak. Griselda was a Nexarian, which meant she looked like someone had crossed a praying mantis with a forensic pathologist and given the result a medical degree and a serious attitude problem. She had compound eyes that could spot a lie from across a star system, and mandibles that clicked ominously when she was annoyed. Which, according to Academy records, was approximately 97% of the time. Riley was in Medical Bay 7, still cradling Blixworth's head, while Dr. Hayes ran increasingly frantic diagnostic scans, when Griselda's distinctive chittering announced her arrival. "Hayes," Griselda clicked, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had performed autopsies on beings that most species couldn't even pronounce. "I require immediate access to the deceased Zelanian for preliminary examination." Riley felt Blixworth's head twitch almost imperceptibly in her arms. Not good. His secondary circulatory system was starting to show signs of activity, which meant they were approaching the 4-hour mark of his biological shutdown. She had maybe 2 hours before his skin started regaining color, and less than that before his body temperature began rising to detectable levels. "Coroner Morthak, Dr. Hayes said, looking up from his scanners with obvious relief at having someone else to deal with the situation. "I'm not sure Cadet Knox is ready to. The human's psychological state is irrelevant to my duties." Griselda interrupted, her mandibles clicking with bureaucratic efficiency. "Academy Regulation 47B requires immediate examination of any cadet fatality to determine cause of death and potential equipment malfunction." Riley looked up at the towering insectoid coroner with wide, innocent eyes. "You want to cut up my friend?" "I want to perform a standard autopsy to determine." "No." The word came out flat and final, with an undertone that made Dr. Hayes take an involuntary step backward. Riley's grip on Blixworth's head tightened protectively, and for a moment, the mask of traumatized victim slipped just enough to reveal something much more dangerous underneath. Griselda's compound eyes focused on Riley with predatory interest. "Cadet Knox, you do not have the authority to try to take him," Riley said quietly, "and find out what humans are really capable of." The threat was delivered with such casual certainty that both Griselda and Dr. Hayes froze. This wasn't the desperate pleading of a grief-stricken friend. This was the calm promise of someone who had calculated exactly how much violence she was prepared to commit, and found the number surprisingly high. Dr. Hayes cleared his throat nervously. "Perhaps we could delay the examination for a few hours. Give Cadet Knox some time to process." "Absolutely not." Griselda clicked. "The body is already beginning to show signs of decomposition. Any further delay could compromise the integrity of the examination." Riley's blood went cold. If Griselda was detecting decomposition, she was either lying or her sensors were picking up the subtle changes in Blixworth's biology as his secondary systems began reactivating. Either way, they were running out of time. That's when Blixworth's left hand, which had been lying motionless at his side, gave the tiniest of twitches. Riley saw it. Dr. Hayes, thankfully, was looking at his diagnostic equipment. But Griselda's compound eyes were designed to catch exactly that kind of movement, and Riley watched in horror as the coroner's head tilted slightly, mandibles clicking with interest. Time for desperate measures. Riley stood up abruptly, still holding Blixworth's head, and began swaying slightly on her feet. "I don't feel well," she mumbled, letting her voice take on a distant, unfocused quality. Dr. Hayes immediately turned his attention to her, medical training overriding everything else. "Riley, what's wrong?" "Everything's spinning," Riley said, making her voice smaller and more confused. "And I keep hearing Blix's voice. He's trying to tell me something." Griselda's mandibles stopped clicking. In the sudden silence, you could have heard a pin drop on the other side of the station. "The deceased is speaking to you," Dr. Hayes asked carefully, his face going pale as he reached for his emergency psychiatric protocols. Riley nodded slowly, her eyes taking on a glassy, distant look. He says he's cold. He wants me to keep him warm." She pulled Blixworth's head closer to her chest, and as she did, she managed to position herself so that her body blocked Griselda's view of his torso. Just in time, because she could see his chest beginning to rise and fall almost imperceptibly as his secondary respiratory system started cycling air. "Fascinating," Griselda clicked, but her tone had shifted from bureaucratic efficiency to scientific curiosity. "Dr. Hayes, are you familiar with the human concept of auditory hallucinations in trauma cases?" "Yes, but Riley's psychological profile doesn't suggest any predisposition to." "He's getting warmer," Riley interrupted, her voice taking on an eerie sing-song quality that made both aliens take a step backward. "His skin is starting to feel normal again. Isn't that strange?" It was strange, because it was also true. Blixworth's secondary circulation was bringing his body temperature back up to normal ranges, and his skin was beginning to show the faintest hint of returning color. Riley was buying time by making it sound like a symptom of her supposed psychological break, but she knew they couldn't keep this up much longer. Dr. Hayes was frantically consulting his datapad. "Griselda, I think we need to postpone the examination. The human is clearly experiencing severe psychological trauma with possible hallucinatory episodes. Any additional stress could trigger a complete breakdown." "And what," Griselda asked with scientific interest, "would a complete human psychological breakdown look like, exactly?" Riley met the coroner's compound gaze directly, letting just a hint of her actual personality show through the traumatized victim act. "Would you really like to find out?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Both aliens were now staring at Riley, with the dawning realization that they might be dealing with something significantly more dangerous than a grief-stricken cadet having hallucinations. And somewhere in the back of Riley's mind, she was counting down the minutes until Blixworth's miraculous recovery would need to begin. Because one way or another, this performance was about to reach its climax. What happened next would go down in Galactic Academy history as either the most remarkable case of interspecies psychological phenomena ever recorded, or the most elaborate practical joke in military education. The jury was still out on which interpretation was more terrifying. Riley had been holding Blixworth's head for exactly 4 hours and 37 minutes when she felt the subtle shift in his muscle tension that meant his primary consciousness was starting to return. His skin was warming noticeably now, and she could see the faintest hint of purple beginning to creep back into his gray complexion. It was time for the finale. "He's saying something," Riley whispered, her voice taking on that eerie, distant quality that had been making everyone in the medical bay increasingly uncomfortable. He says he forgives me." Dr. Hayes looked up from his diagnostic equipment with growing alarm. "Riley, I really think we need to consider sedation until we can get you proper psychiatric care." "No," Riley said more firmly. "He needs me to stay awake. He says the connection is getting stronger." She paused, tilting her head as if listening to an inaudible voice. He's trying to come back." Griselda's mandibles clicked with scientific fascination. "Dr. Hayes, are you recording this? The human appears to be exhibiting previously undocumented psychic phenomena related to trauma bonding with deceased." That's when Blixworth's eyes snapped open. The effect was immediate and devastating. Dr. Hayes dropped his scanner, which clattered to the floor with a sound like breaking glass. Griselda's compound eyes went wide, and she made a chittering noise that was probably swearing in ancient Nexarian. Even Riley, who had been expecting it, felt her heart skip a beat. Blixworth blinked slowly, his eyes focusing on Riley's face with what appeared to be dawning recognition. His skin was rapidly cycling through shades of confused purple and pink, and when he opened his mouth to speak, his voice came out as a barely audible whisper. "Riley, what happened?" The silence in the medical bay was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop in the vacuum of space. Riley's response was Oscar-worthy. She gasped, her eyes filling with tears of apparent relief and joy, and pulled Blixworth's head closer to her chest. "Blix, oh my God, Blix, you're alive. I was dead, Blixworth whispered, his natural dramatic instincts kicking in despite his supposed disorientation. I remember the pain, and then, darkness, cold, but I could hear your voice calling me back. Doctor. Hayes had gone completely pale, and was frantically scanning his equipment for some kind of rational explanation. Griselda was clicking so rapidly, it sounded like a percussion instrument having a seizure. This is impossible, the coroner chittered. Complete cardiac arrest. Brain death confirmed. Body temperature dropped to ambient levels. Grief, Riley said simply, looking up at them with tear-streaked cheeks and eyes that held just a hint of something otherworldly. Human grief brought him back. And that's when Commander Throkus arrived with half the Academy's senior staff in tow, just in time to witness what appeared to be a miraculous resurrection powered by human emotional intensity. The next few hours were a blur of medical examinations, incident reports, and increasingly frantic attempts by Academy officials to find a rational explanation for what they'd witnessed. Blixworth, true to his theatrical nature, played his role perfectly, confused, grateful, and just disoriented enough to make his resurrection seem genuine without being able to provide clear details about the experience. Riley, meanwhile, had transitioned from traumatized victim to mysterious miracle worker, a role she played with just the right balance of humility and otherworldly confidence. When pressed for explanations, she simply repeated that her grief had somehow called Blixworth back from wherever the dead go, and that she didn't understand it any more than they did. The Academy bought it completely. Within 24 hours, reports were being filed with the Galactic Council about previously unknown human psychic abilities. Emergency protocols were being rewritten to account for the possibility that human emotional responses might have tangible effects on reality. The entire Academy's attitude toward human cadets shifted overnight from condescending tolerance to nervous respect, which is exactly what Riley and Blixworth had been planning for. But here's where the story gets really interesting, because 3 days later, Riley was called to a private meeting with Academy Director Vorthak, an ancient, crab-like being who had been running the Academy since before humans had discovered fire. Cadet Knox, Vorthak said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. Please, sit down. Riley sat, maintaining her carefully crafted persona of confused innocence. Director, if this is about the incident. Oh, it's definitely about the incident, Vorthak interrupted, and there was something in his tone that made Riley's blood run cold. Specifically, it's about how you and Cadet Zephram managed to stage the most convincing fake death and resurrection in Academy history. Riley's carefully maintained expression didn't change, but inside, her mind was racing. Sir, I don't understand, Cadet Knox, Vorthak said gently. I've been running this Academy for 300 years. Do you really think this is the first time two clever students have tried to manipulate the system to gain better treatment for their species? The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Riley could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. Then Vorthak began to laugh, a sound like grinding sandstone that somehow conveyed genuine amusement. Cadet Knox, what you and your Zelanian friend accomplished was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. You identified the Academy's prejudices, exploited our assumptions about your species' capabilities, and executed a plan that not only achieved your immediate goals but fundamentally shifted the entire Academy's approach to human integration. Riley stared at him, her mind struggling to process what she was hearing. The whole thing was a test, Vorthak continued, his ancient eyes twinkling with something that might have been pride. We've been watching human cadets for 3 years, waiting to see who would be clever enough, bold enough, and creative enough to challenge our systems instead of simply accepting them. You and Cadet Zephram exceeded our expectations in every possible way. Riley found her voice at last. A test. The Academy doesn't just train soldiers, Cadet Knox. We train leaders. And leaders don't accept unfair systems, they change them. Vorthak leaned forward, his expression growing serious. Your psychological profile suggested you had the potential for command-level thinking, but we needed to see it in action. Creating an elaborate deception that fooled our medical staff, manipulated our command structure, and achieved lasting institutional change. That's exactly the kind of strategic thinking we need in our officer corps. Riley felt her worldview shifting like tectonic plates. So we're not in trouble. Vorthak's laugh returned, that grinding sandstone sound of ancient amusement. Cadet Knox, you and Cadet Zephram have just earned the highest marks in Academy history for creative problem-solving and tactical innovation. Congratulations, you've both been fast-tracked for advanced command training. 6 months later, Cadet Riley Knox and Cadet Blixworth Zephram were the Academy's star pupils, respected and slightly feared by their alien classmates, who had learned that humans and Zelanians were significantly more dangerous than they appeared. The story of Blixworth's resurrection had spread throughout the galaxy, establishing humans as a species with mysterious and potentially supernatural capabilities, which was exactly what they'd planned. Well, except for the part where it turned out the whole thing had been orchestrated by the Academy administration as an elaborate test of human ingenuity and adaptability. But as Riley liked to tell people when they asked about it, the best plans are the ones that work even when you don't know you're following them. And somewhere in the Academy archives, in a file marked exemplary leadership demonstrations, there's a detailed analysis of how two cadets from supposedly primitive species managed to fundamentally alter galactic perceptions of their capabilities, through nothing more than careful planning, perfect execution, and the willingness to commit completely to an absolutely ridiculous idea. The report concludes with a single recommendation: never underestimate the tactical value of appearing harmless right up until the moment you decide not to be. Riley Knox couldn't have said it better herself.